if you want to try to remember someone's name after they say it, try to repeat it in your head. Okay, so my name is Father Jordan Dosch. I'm what's called the Vocation Director of the Diocese of Bismarck. So let's get some guesses. What do you guys think that I do? I direct vocations. What do you think that means? What do you think it means? Every diocese has someone who's called a vocation director. What do you think that means? Come on, just guess anything. You guys know? I'm the boss.
You're the boss, man.
Not completely true. I'm really young, so there's a lot of older, more experienced priests than I am in the diocese. Or what do you think I'm in charge of?
Other priests.
Other priests?
Things.
What do you guys think? What do you guys think? What is a vocation? Have you ever heard that?
Do you take care of paperwork?
Sometimes, but it's not really fun. So what a vocation director is I'm in charge of all the young guys who are studying to be priests. Okay, so it takes a while to be a priest. It takes about 8 years after high school. So it's my job to make sure that they're doing well and that they're going to become good priests who, after they're ordained, they're going to be in your parishes, right? They're going to be your priests. So I'm there to make sure that they're doing well, that they become the best possible priest that they can be for you guys. So I'm in charge of the seminarians who are studying to be priests, but then I also help young guys who are thinking about the priesthood, okay? So if anyone comes up and they think they have thoughts about the priesthood, I help walk them through the process to see whether or not they should join seminary, when's the right time. There's a long application process that I help them through. So I go around the diocese. Just today I was in Dickinson. I was at Trinity High School, and I preached to all the high school kids about being a priest, what it actually means, and why it's important. So I go around the diocese, preaching on vocations, making people aware of it, and just putting that thought into young guys' minds that maybe possibly they could become a priest. So that's what I do. You guys want to guess how old I am?
I guess about 34. 34, 40.
Younger.
29.
29.
Oh.
I'm 29 years old. So 29 years old. So I was ordained just 3 years ago. And right after I was ordained, I was assigned to Dickinson at the city of Dickinson. I was a parish there. But then my main job was that I was a teacher and chaplain at Trinity High School. So for 3 years, I taught juniors and seniors. I taught the morality and sacraments for the junior class and seniors. I taught kind of a variety of different classes, a C.S. Lewis class, and then also like a church and science kind of class. So I didn't go to school to be a teacher, but I taught for 3 years. So I'm used to people giving me questions, okay? So as I'm talking, if something doesn't make sense to you or you want me to explain it better, why not just raise your hand, right? Just like you do in normal class, just raise your hand.
When you went to Dickinson today, was there a kid with an elbow needle? Or a needle elbow?
At Trinity High School? I don't know.
Well,
Why, do you know someone?
No, because there was a kid who elbowed a man down, soccer player,
Oh, yeah.
last night.
Yeah, so I don't know. I was at Trinity High School, so there's 2 high schools. This is the Catholic one. And that's where I was also when I was a teacher. So I got to go back and I got to be a teacher there. So if you guys have any questions at the end, this is not going to take an entire hour. So if you guys have any questions at the very end, we can have a little discussion. You guys have any questions about me? That's fine. When I was in high school, about every other Friday, almost every Friday, we would have conversations. My students, we call it Question Day. They were able to ask me whatever question they wanted. So it didn't have to do with what I was teaching, but if they had a question about me personally, such as, why I always wear black, do I always have to wear black? Sometimes they had questions about political things that were happening, sometimes about cultural things, sometimes they had questions about the church, about what's going on. So that was their opportunity to be able to ask me whatever they wanted. So at the very end, I can answer those questions. Okay, so let me kind of tell you the story of how I became a priest. Because when people see a young priest, sometimes that kind of shakes them. Because most of the time, their understanding of who a priest is someone that is old and lonely. Mm-hmm. But that isn't necessarily the case, right? God still calls young people. I was called to be a priest. I'm serving as a priest. So I'm going to kind of tell you how that happened, and you'll see that it really wasn't anything special. It was actually just a very normal calling, but once you actually see what that is like, then maybe you can see how God works in your own life. So, as I said, I'm the vocation director, which I mainly deal with people who are studying to be priests. So who can be priests? Can guys be priests? Can girls be priests? Who can be a priest? Guys, okay? And if you want to know why, we can talk about that. Feel free to ask that question. So typically, I work with young men who are thinking about becoming priests. So for you young women, if you're just like, okay, this talk doesn't have anything to do with me, I'm just going to turn off. That's not true, okay? Because this talk still does apply to you. You'll be able to see how God works in your own life. But also, priests don't come from priests, right? I had a mother and a dad. I came from a family. Priests don't come from priests, they come from good, holy families. So even though if you're a female, obviously you yourselves are not called to be a priest, but maybe, God willing, one of your sons may be. So this is good for you to know, so that if that does happen, you guys kind of know what that is like. Okay? Good? When you guys wear masks, it's hard to see like your facial expressions.
Yeah.
It's hard to see like if you're understanding what I'm saying, if you're like paying attention. Maybe you're like super mad at me behind the mask. I don't know. It's hard to tell. Just if you guys have any questions, just please feel free to raise your hand. Yes.
If I look mad, it's just my resting face.
Okay, sounds good. I have an angry resting face as well, so that's why I try to smile more.
On Sunday, my mom came in and she's just like, "Why are you so angry?"
Yeah. So I am 29 years old. I was born and raised in Bismarck. I went to school here. This is the cafeteria that I used to eat lunch in. So I went from first grade through 8th grade at Cathedral Grade School and junior high. It used to be a junior high, now it's not. But went first through 8th grade here, then went to St. Mary's High School. I loved high school. I was very involved in sports. I had some great friends, very typical high school kid, teenager. So I played a lot of basketball, played golf, played football. That's kind of what I did, what I would do in the summers, would work for. So that's what I spent my time doing. When I was in the high school, the thing that really changed for me was seeing the young priests who would go back and teach. So just like what I did, like I said, when I was out in Dickinson, when I taught there for 3 years, typically what we have our young priests do is they go back to the high school after they're ordained and they teach. And when I was in high school, that's what happened. And there was a couple of young priests who were there at the high school during my 4 years. And when I saw them, it gave me the understanding that priests aren't old and lonely. Priests are young and joyful as well. Priests are joyful. And I saw this in these priests who were there, who were my teachers, who were my chaplains, that they loved what they were doing. They were happy being priests, and I saw that this was a real vocation that people are called to. So when I was in high school, to be quite honest, I never thought about being a priest. Never thought. I went through 12 years of Catholic education, and the thought that I possibly could be called to be a priest didn't really cross my mind, which sounds kind of strange. I remember being in school asking priests kind of, like the softball questions of, you should ask this guy about being a priest. I would ask him, what made you want to be a priest? Do you like being a priest? Questions like that. So even though I wasn't explicitly thinking about it, it was kind of deep down something that was growing inside of me. And I'm able to see that now, wasn't able to see it at the time. So loved high school, went to St. Mary's High School, friends, sports. So that was always a lot of fun. After my senior year of high school, the high school does what's called a pilgrimage. So they take a trip to Rome. You can participate in this trip if you're a senior who just graduated. Now it's after your junior year, but when I was there, it's after your senior year. And I went to Rome. I wasn't on the trip for probably the best intentions. I wanted to go to Rome because I wanted to eat pizza, wanted to eat pasta, wanted to see the Colosseum, wanted to see a foreign country. But I experienced something much more deep when I was on the trip. When I was on the trip, I remember praying in a church just by myself. So in Rome, there's churches literally everywhere, right? So the city of Bismarck has, guess how many Catholic churches the city of Bismarck has?
5.
There's 5. In the city of Rome, there would be over 100 some. There's churches literally everywhere. And a large part of this trip was that we would go and see these big important churches, okay, all around town. And I remember praying in one of the churches, and the thought of, hey, you could be a priest, just came into my mind. And that just like really troubled me. I didn't really know what to do with it. The thought that possibly that I was called to be a priest was something really hard, and I didn't know what to do. But the thing that really convinced me that this was a possibility was that at my high school, I had these young, joyful priests, and they gave me an example that being a priest, that you can be happy being a priest. So the thought of what a vocation is, right? So I told you that I'd get back to this. Vocation comes from the Latin word vocare, which means it's a calling. It's something that you're called to do. So every single person in their entire life, every single person has 2 vocations. Everyone is called to 2 vocations. What the Catechism calls is the first one is a universal vocation. Every single person is called to this. It's called the universal call to holiness. Everyone is called to be holy. Doesn't matter if you're a priest, doesn't matter if you're married, doesn't matter if you're a religious brother or sister, doesn't matter if you're single, doesn't matter what you do, you are called to be holy. That's the number one thing. And then how that is lived out is in the second vocation, what you're called to do, such as, are you called to be a priest? Are you called to be married? Are you called to be in the religious life? That's the secondary call. And how you live out that secondary call is really how you become holy, right? So there's a thought that God has a vocation for each one of you, right? Each one of you, God has a vocation for. And whatever that is, whatever that vocation is where you will be most happy, most fruitful, most faithful. It's where you're going to live your best life if you live out that vocation that God is calling you to. And as I was sitting in that church, the thought of, if I'm called to be a priest, that means I'm going to be more happy, more faithful, more fruitful in the priesthood, in the celibate priesthood, than I would be married. And that thought just like blew my mind. That I didn't think that it was possible. I just assumed that I was called to marriage. And I thought, if that is the case, then this is something that I should be praying about. Okay? This is something that I should be praying about. So I remember just sitting there, and the prayer that came to my mind was, Jesus, if you want me to be a priest, I'll do it. I just want to know. And for the next couple months, the thought of the priesthood kept coming back to me, kept coming back to my mind. Whenever I was going to Mass, the thought that I was called to be a priest kept coming back to me. But like I said, this was the summer after my senior year, and I already had plans to go off to college. So I went to North Dakota State University. I was majoring in engineering. I loved math and science. For some reason, I was good at math and science, and engineering made sense to me. So I went to NDSU to pursue a degree in engineering. And when I was there, I was truly happy. I was joyful. I liked what I was doing. I liked engineering. But the thought of the priesthood was always kind of there. It was always just kind of in the back of my mind. When I was at NDSU, no matter how far I traveled away from the faith, I never gave up on going to Mass and going to confession, which was a huge blessing. So throughout your lives, never stop going to confession, never stop going to Mass. And then because of that, you can't travel too far. The faith will always still be pretty close to you. So when I was at NDSU, I had a random roommate. So if you don't know someone who's going to the school, then you're just assigned someone random to live with you for the rest of the year. And my roommate was, he was a Protestant, and I have lots of Protestants in my family, so obviously pretty familiar with it. But him and I, we got along, but we also argued literally all the time. Like all day, every day, we argued about the faith and religion. I just got done with 12 years of Catholic education. So I knew what the faith believed, right? If you told me, is the church pro-life or pro-choice? I did pro-life. Before, traditional marriage or not traditional marriage? Okay, traditional marriage, Was Mary a virgin? Yeah, she was a virgin. I could tell you like what the church believed, but I didn't know why they believed it. I didn't know the reasons behind it. So when I was arguing with my friend, we would debate all these issues, and I found out that the church doesn't just say these things to make your life difficult or make up certain things, so that you believe crazy things. But they have good reason for what they believe in, and there are reasons for why we believe what we believe if you go out and find it. So as I was arguing with my roommate, I would have to call up former religion teachers or my old chaplains, and I'd ask them, I'd say, okay, why do we believe this? Explain this to me. They would explain it to me, then I'd go and talk about it with my roommate. And all of our debates and arguments never made me question the faith, such as whether or not this is right. But it helped me understand it better, and it made my faith much deeper, and it made me take my faith more seriously, because I saw that there were good reasons for why we believe what we actually believe in. So, NDSU was a good experience for me. Like I said, I was happy. At the end of the year, one of my good friends, who I went to high school with, invited me to go to the cities with him, St. Paul, Minneapolis, and to visit the seminary. He knew that this is something that I was thinking about, and he thought that me going to visit the seminary would be a good experience. We had some friends who went to high school with us who were in seminary, so we were going to go visit them. And when I got to the seminary, I felt at peace. Okay, so when you're dealing with God, He's going to move your heart through peace and love. He's not going to scare you into seminary. He's not going to scare you into doing something or persuade you out of fear to do something. No, God is peace. He is love. And when I was at NDSU, like I said, I was happy, but I could see that I was like still a little restless, right? I was happy, but I wasn't peaceful. And when I got to the seminary, I went to class with the guys. I spent the weekend there. I prayed with them in the morning. I hung out with guys who were already in seminary. And I found that peace that I was actually looking for. And I understood that seminary was the next step for me. I didn't know whether or not I was called to be a priest, but it became pretty obvious to me that my next step was to seminary. So if you're studying to be a priest, the place in which you go is called a seminary. Typically, a seminary is at a university, and that's where you take your classes. So my seminary was called St. John Vianney College Seminary, and it was on the campus of the University of St. Thomas. So the degree in which I received is just like any other degree from the university, but I was living at the seminary. So when I was at the seminary, like I said, I knew that I was supposed to join seminary, but I didn't know whether or not I was called to be a priest. Most people who join seminary, most guys who join seminary, don't end up becoming priests. But it's actually the time of discernment in which you try to figure out whether or not God is calling you to this vocation, right? You're not figuring this out on your own. Obviously, through a lot of prayer and discernment, you see whether or not God is calling you to this. So, during this time that I was thinking about this, I had guys who were much older than I was, and they would say to me, I always thought that I should have been a priest. And I look at them and I say, I hope at some point you're able to receive peace in the decision that you made. But I never want to think that, right? I never want to think that I could have been happier. I could have been more fruitful. I could have been more faithful. I could have been doing God's will better in another vocation. I didn't want to think that, right? I wanted to have confirmation that either God was calling me to the married life or calling me to the priesthood. And my time in seminary was helping me to clarify this. And the decision that I would make from that would give me 100% certainty that this is what God was wanting me to do. So, seminary was the next step. That's why I joined. I knew that my time in seminary would not be a waste. So maybe I'd give it 1 year, maybe I'd give it 2 years, maybe 3 years or so. I wasn't quite sure. But I knew that at the end of this time of discernment, that if I wasn't called to be a priest, the time wouldn't be a waste, right? I was young, I had time to discern this, and that I knew that if I would leave seminary, I'd come out a better husband, I'd come out a better man, I'd come out a better father, that this time God would bless and he would allow me to discern this properly. So after my weekend at the seminary, I went back to NDSU, and it became pretty obvious to me that I wasn't going to come back. That the next step was probably going to be to join seminary. So I didn't really know how to go about this. Each diocese has a vocation director. Like I said, I work with young guys who are thinking about this vocation. And someone told me to call the vocation director, so I called him and just said, hey, I'm a young guy, I don't really know how to do this, but I'm thinking about the priesthood, I don't know what to do. And he said very goodly, he said, very well, he said, where are you at? He said, I'm going to come visit you, I want to talk to you, I want to help you. And I said, I'm at NDSU, I'm in Fargo, just know that I have like 2 weeks of school left. I'm like, just let me finish school, and then when I move back to Bismarck, I'll come meet you. And that's what we agreed on. And for those 2 weeks that I was at NDSU, I literally had a really tough time studying because all that I could think about was the priesthood. I just want to go to adoration, just wanted to go to mass. The thought of the priesthood was on my mind. And the fact that, since I was in engineering and I wasn't going to have to take Calculus 3 anymore, the thought of like studying really hard for these exams, it took a lot to get me motivated to study for these because I knew that I was going to do something different the next year. But pushed through, passed all my classes, moved back to Bismarck, met with the vocation director, and this was like at the end of May. So most people, when they apply for college, typically they're doing it in November, December, January or so. This is the end of May, so I was really late. And I remember meeting with them, and we had a very good conversation, and it became clear that the next step for me was to be seminary, and that he thought that I should be applying for seminary. And so he gave me the application, and he said, if you want to go to seminary, you need to fill this out now, because we don't have a lot of time before the next academic year begins. So took the application home. It's a long, lengthy application. And I remember I filled it all out 1 or 2 days, handed it back in. And I just said, if everything goes through, this proves that this is God's will, that this is what I should be doing. And I was actually happy that everything happened so quickly, because if it would have taken me longer, I definitely would have gotten cold feet and probably would not have gone. So thankfully, everything happened quickly, was accepted as a seminarian for the Diocese of Bismarck, and then was assigned to go back to St. Paul to go to school there. So I spent 3 years at the University of St. Thomas. There were 3 really good years. They were really hard because I was growing a lot, I was learning a lot, I was being challenged. They were great years. And at the end of each of my years there, I would get to the end of one academic year, and I would have this question: is God calling me to be a priest? And I would say, I've never been as happy, I've never been as peaceful in my entire life. And that was a good indication that I should be coming back. So I came back for another year, got to the end of that year, and it said, never been as happy, never been as peaceful in my entire life. So I came back, kept coming back, and I grew in clarity that God was calling me to be a priest. So at the end of 3 years at St. Thomas, the bishop and the vocation director sent me over to Rome. So I spent 4.5 years studying in Rome. So I studied philosophy right away. Then the last 4 years were studying theology. And then at the end of that time, I came back to Bismarck, was ordained a priest for the Diocese of Bismarck, and then was sent out to Dickinson, spent 3 years teaching at a high school, which I told you about, and then I just moved back to Bismarck this last summer, and now I'm the vocation director for the Diocese of Bismarck. So living back in Bismarck, happy to be here. My siblings are all here, my parents are here. It's good to be back home. So that's typically my vocation story. So to kind of sum it up, kind of the big points, a vocation is that which you are called to. Every single person is called to 2 vocations. The first is one to holiness. It doesn't matter if you're married, doesn't matter if you're a priest, doesn't matter if you're a religious brother or sister. Every single person is called to holiness. Everyone is called to be holy. And the way in which that is lived out is through your second vocation, which is to this particular area, right? To married life, to priesthood, or to the religious life. Okay, so if I would go around this room and I would say, you know, what do your dads do? What do your moms do? What do you guys want to do with your life? You would give me answers such as doctors, lawyers, electricians, they work with computers, right? Police officers, stuff like that. You would tell me what their occupation is. But the thing that comes before an occupation is a vocation, right? You need to figure out what your vocation is first until you can figure out what your occupation is. So for me personally, right, I had to discern whether or not I was called to be a priest before I could faithfully commit to being an engineer. Because guess what? I can't be a priest and an engineer at the same time. So if God was calling me to a vocation to the priesthood, that changed what this occupation was. So you need to figure out that first. So much of it is just becoming close to God, right? Growing in that relationship to see where he may be calling you to. So, yes.
If you can, look back to when you were 10, 11, 12 years old.
Yeah.
Do you see anything then in your life that
Yeah.
might have been the seeds of your vocation?
Yeah, so, you know, looking back now, I'm able to. At that time, I didn't, because like I said, the thought of the priesthood wasn't on my mind. There is a short video called Fishers of Men. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, but it's just, I think it's like less than an hour, but it's kind of like a documentary on the priesthood, of encouraging young guys to think about the priesthood. And I remember watching it at a young age and kind of getting chills when I watched it. I remember thinking, that would be cool if I was called to be a priest. Just that thought, you know? Or, you know, when I was at the cathedral, a lot of young priests were assigned to the cathedral right after they were ordained. So when I was going through grade school, priests would come visit the classrooms. And I remember in, you know, 2nd grade, 3rd grade, where priests would come to the classroom, and he would stand up in front of you kind of like this and answer your questions, see how you guys were doing. And I remember thinking, you know, they're really cool. You know, I like them. Growing up, it was never a question of whether or not we would go to Mass. That wasn't the question was when we were going to go to Mass. So I was very thankful to, you know, come to a family. Grew up in a family that took that serious. So being able to go to Mass regularly was really good. Having different teachers in high school. I had some great teachers in high school who weren't priests, right? So one of my favorite teachers, you know, he was the wrestling coach and the history teacher, and also a religion teacher. So he helped me see that you can be normal and Catholic at the same time, right? You don't have to be weird. that being Catholic, you can be normal. And you can be a good, virtuous man living it out. So when I see it lived out in those guys, and I say, you know, I want that. You know, I want that faith. So, you know, being able to grow in that were all things that help contribute. So definitely going to a Catholic school, my family, having good teachers, going to Mass. You know, I remember my first confession, remember my first communion, right? I remember my confirmation. So my confirmation saint was Saint Michael. I don't know why I chose that name. I didn't really have a devotion to Michael, didn't really know much about who he was. I knew that he carried a sword and he looked really cool, and I thought that was awesome. So that's basically why I chose him. But then throughout the years, I really grew in a devotion to him. So I remember my confirmation. I remember that having a big role. And I remember like really choosing the faith, which is good. So most of you guys go to Mass because your parents take you to Mass. But you're gonna have to come to a point in your life where you know your parents aren't gonna take you to Mass anymore. You're gonna be old enough where you have to make that decision on your own. And when I was at NDSU, I remember laying in my bed on the first Sunday morning that I was there, and I remember thinking to myself, if I don't go to Mass, Nobody knows, right? My parents aren't there making sure that I go to Mass. And you know what? I got out of bed and went to Mass because that was developed in me from a young age, okay? And that when I was there, I was able to make that decision on my own, and I was very thankful for that. So there's lots of little things. I remember when I would go on road trips with my grandma, she'd pray the rosary, right? And I remember not really liking the rosary, but I remember thinking it made time pass quickly. So when we would go on road trips, I remember asking my grandma, like, can we pray the rosary because I want the time to go by quickly, not because I really knew what I was doing. And that came back to me because when I was in Rome, when the thought about the priesthood came to my mind, my response was to pray a rosary. And I didn't really know how. I knew you said Hail Mary's here and Our Father's here. So I had a rosary in my pocket and I tried to pray a rosary. So, but that was kind of there because of my grandma, you know, that she would do that for us when we were little. So there are a lot of those little things. So I just encourage you guys that right now you're young. You don't have to make any big decision on what you're going to do with your life, right? You're not going to get married in the next year. You guys aren't going to go to college in the next year. A lot of these big decisions are still kind of far out. But you need to prepare yourself to be able to make those big decisions, okay? So I wouldn't have been able to make the decision to go to Mass when I was on my own if that foundation wasn't laid for me before, such as making that decision every single week to go to Mass. That's what helped me make that decision when I was finally on my own. So right now, though you may think this is a long ways off, I don't need to worry about this, may be true. But you guys still need to develop that prayer life and that response of being able to listen to God so that when that does come, you do know what it sounds like and you are able to make that decision, okay? So what I always tell young people is every night before you go to bed, just say 3 Hail Marys. Just say 3 Hail Marys and just say, Jesus, I'll do whatever you want. That's all you have to do. Just say 3 Hail Marys and just say, Jesus, I'll do whatever you want. Because in Scripture, there's often times where Mary didn't understand what was happening, right? She didn't understand why she was going to have Jesus. She didn't understand, why Jesus had to go through this passion and death, but she didn't question it. Scripture just describes it as she pondered these things in her heart. She didn't understand it. She thought about it in her heart, but she understood that it was God's will. So that's why I say pray 3 Hail Marys, because as you go through your life, you may not understand what has happened, right? I ask myself every single day why God called me to be a priest. I don't know. I may not understand it, but I understand that it's God's will, so therefore I accept it. Okay? So every night before you go to bed, say 3 Hail Marys and ask Jesus to give you the strength